Okay. Now we'll see if we can get this going. This is my second time on this, so hopefully. Last time we left, we were in this view. We've been working on the foot control, and we were changing these around with set-driven key and that sort of thing. So if you're still in this view, just what I'm doing is going back into my outliner perspective view. Again, this is the third one down of these panel layouts. I'm just gonna make sure that I clean things out, or not clean them rather, but just close things that are open that I don't need to see. So I'm not working the foot control. We're gonna push forward onto the spine. So I'm gonna go to the right view. So again, with the class, we're kind of running into this thing where I'm a little behind everyone. So I'm just pushing through to the arm as fast as possible. So making sure that we aren't in animation anymore, because last time we left we were in animation for the set-driven key. So I'm just going to make sure I'm in rigging. And I'm going to go to skeleton, create joints. Zoom in a little bit here. Like that. That looks good. So now I'm just going to put in the series of joints for the pelvis, starting kind of low. Click away and drag back in. Again, what we're trying to do here is create several joints near the bottom to have a lot of bendy. And then working my way here. And I'm probably not going to need a lot of bending in this area. There isn't even any divisions here to bend on. So I'm just going to come up above that. And usually the chest kind of has kind of this, place where it doesn't bend. So one of the things, the number here really doesn't matter. It's kind of up to you. How bendy do you want things to be? And then what I did is up at the top, I kind of added a couple more just to be a little more bendy at the top as well. Got to the neck, the base of the neck, and then I did one more at the base of the head. And then the last one's just, we call a head end joint. And in some ways, you almost don't even really need it. And that's the basic layout of the joints. Of course, you could spend more time laying these out and doing all kinds of things with those. And I'm not going to get into the details of laying them out every time. But before you get too far, just remember that some students were having the issue that their joints were actually somehow had gotten snapped to the leg joint, most likely the hip. But when they first started, they clicked on it and it sort of snapped it out of the center of the character and was going on the side. And if that's the case, I just make a new one. So the tools that we'll need are, well, let's name these first, right? So the naming, the first one's going to be called pelvis, JNT, and then we just did a series of spines, just however many spines that you had. So I was just doing spine 1, JNT. I can remember I can spine 2, JNT. I gotta remember that I can actually arrow down and hit enter. So again, this is kind of new to me that I can do that. Spine 3, JNT. And the idea would be you would just put in however many spine joints that you would have. I think in class I ended up with 10 or something like that. Oops, I did the thing where that's where I'm forgetting, I'm using the arrows and I'm forgetting to hit enter to put the name in. So I keep, especially with spine is bad because then you make a keyframe right off the bat. But anyway. So now we're at that neck region. So this joint's actually the neck. So now now you just be watching these until you got to the last 3. In this case, it'd be the last 3. So this one's going to be the neck. This is going to be the head, and then we call this head end. So I'm just going to click in there and call this neck, JNT, and then this one's called head, JNT. And this one's called head. Oops, didn't enter. Head and JNT. And that sets us up for all the naming. Oh, and I also hit that by accident, so let me just... So again, I keep selecting and then typing, and I'm using key commands when I'm doing that. So you want to be careful when you're doing that. If you accidentally start typing, you might want to just check the view and see if you change anything. So in that case, I hit H, which hides something. So just watch out for that. Been doing that a lot lately. So now we'll get into the IK spline handle, and we did go to the box because there were a couple of things that we wanted to change there. So what I did do was I went to auto parent curve was off, and then we played around with however many we had here on the number of spans. So in class we had some different responses. We'll see how it works here. So again, the one was kind of like a real nice simple method, but the curve was so simple that it was kind of bending the joints out of the position that we just laid them in. So it didn't really seem to make total sense. So we ended up using 2 in class. Remember where that was in skeleton, create IK spline handle. And these are the settings. I'm going to do 2, and I unchecked auto parent curve. Sorry, wrong button. And so what we want to do is we get not the pelvis here. It's the joint right above that. It's actually the first spine joint. So we're gonna click on the spine joint, and then the last one is going to be the neck joint. So I'm just going to click on the neck joint. And now we've got a good spline handle on there. We named this the spine. Okay. And I named this spine curve. And technically the controls are curves, so if you look at the foot control, it has the same S sort of shape to it. So whenever I say curve, that's something different than a control. So that's kind of how I try to keep track of those things. Don't really need this open, so I'm going to close that tool set a little bit. So what we did with the spine curve is we actually had it selected, and then we went to display and we said hide unselected objects, which made the curve available and really easy to select. Otherwise it's just very difficult to work with. We right click on the object and go to control vertex, which gives us the vertices, control vertices to work with. Now in class we ended up first trying to do the first 2, and at home it felt like that worked fine for me, and in the classroom having that third one not be part of something ended up being a problem, so it wasn't actually moving with anything. So what we'll do is select the top 3. And what we did is we added a cluster here. So the cluster basically is now controlling 3 points. So it's basically like selecting 3 points, and I can connect things to the cluster now. So we need to right click on the curve one more time, and we'll select the bottom set of vertices, control vertices, and we'll make one more cluster. And we name those upper spine cluster and lower spine cluster. Kind of long names, but I think it helps when we're putting everything together. So now I'm just going to go back to display and go to show all, which puts everything back into the scene so you can see everything. So those are the main pieces we needed to create to make the joints. So now what we need to do is start making the curves to work along the side. So I'm just going to duplicate our copy curve. So Command D for duplicate. Get my move tool. Basically what we're going to do is I'm snap up into the pelvis joint and just see that actually I don't know, I'm close. So just snapping onto the pelvis. Looks good. So now it's on the pelvis. So basically, we're just going to be making a series of boxes on the outside. I did some different things with these. Like I had this one was it's the pelvis. I did some certain things to this one. What I tend to do maybe would be to just kind of pull off this one and then edit as we go. So I'm just going to duplicate this curve, Command D. You could always grab from the original copy one. And I'm just going to snap this one up somewhere near that C. And it might be a joint, it might actually be the cluster. It's not really like a specific point necessarily. It doesn't work that way necessarily, so it's fine that it's not necessarily centered on anything, but good idea to kind of try and pick something that's logical, that way you sort of know where it is. What I ended up doing was actually just doing a rotation along those lines. Did a little squish. I went into the control vertexes, and just so it looks kind of same as it did in the class, it just kind of made like a V shape like that. It just kind of seemed, I don't know, it looks sort of cool. I guess really honestly is more what it is, but it makes it easier to work with. I think that it's different. It's really different than the pelvis, and sometimes it's hard to see this shape. So what I did is I just basically got it close in there, and then I'm going to duplicate that again. Or actually, you can see that the whole thing is kind of acts a little bit funny because it's been rotated. So there's other ways around it, but one nice way is just modify freeze transformations, which we want to get used to doing anyway. Oh, went into some sort of paint tool or something. Okay, so that makes this object a little easier to work with now because it now sees itself oriented in the way that it was to begin with. And then I can then duplicate this one. And this one was kind of similar. It's kind of near that C sort of, right here in the middle here. So I'm just holding V in the middle, mousing, and it's grabbing the joint there, not necessarily the C. It does not necessarily have to be aligned with anything there. It can be a little bit off. The rotations, it's kind of working over a segment of that curve, so it doesn't necessarily have to be centered. And this was throwing a lot of people off in class. Like, where do you put it? And they wanted a real definite place to put it, and the answer really kept being, well, it's kind of what makes sense to your character. So trying to get these things to fit a little bit into the character, I think, is also worthwhile. So I'm just kind of squishing down and making the shape kind of easy to select, but at the same time kind of pushed into the character a little bit so that it's not so sometimes it feels like these curves, like I've been saying in class, just get in the way. Like there's so many of them and they're really hard to deal with. It just gets overwhelming as an animator, and I kind of sometimes don't really like it. I'll need one more curve up here, so I'm just going to duplicate the copy curve. I could take this one. It's not really that important. We want sort of a mid-back point that we'll work with, and this will help us to rotate the entire back over onto itself. So these will really control the top of the shoulder and the bottom of the hips, these two curves that we just created. And then we'll have one more in the middle, and that will be sort of the back control. So I'm just going to duplicate this one more time. And we're going to just snap this up into maybe this region up here. Let's get zoomed in, see what I'm actually snapping onto. I'm just going to use this joint right here to get it centered and then move it up a little bit. Around in here maybe looks good. So all of it looks pretty good. Really big. So in class what I did is I kind of made this just like a little chunk like this. I didn't really want it sticking out too much. Again, the idea is to put these in ways that make sense. You really want differences in them. That way, when you're clicking on them, they really, in selecting them as an animator, you can clearly tell that you're getting, the hips or the shoulders, or you're getting the center of the back, or you're getting the pelvis itself. Sometimes I like to work on the pelvis a little bit, so just control vertex, maybe scale in a little bit here, selecting the control vertexes here, kind of make like a little section that pokes out. This is a pretty primary part of the character. You're going to be animating this one a lot, so I want this one pretty prominent, easy to select. So leave that one out in a big way. So that's our 4 curves. So we basically have this one, which is going to be our pelvis curve. This is going to be our spine, our lower spine. This will be our upper spine, and this last one is the back. So I'm just going to work my way through these names. So the first one down here at the bottom, okay, I'm going to call that pelvis control, and I think in the class for some reason I called this body control, which I'm going to go back to pelvis control because it matches the joint. This one's going to be lower spine CNTL for control. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm clicking on. This is the upper spine CNTL. And then the last one was the back control. So I was kind of calling this back control. I don't know, again, it's always weird coming up with names, but we'll call this back CNTL. Try and be a little bit consistent with the class. And this one, again, is going to rotate the back. So moving these around and changing things has an effect on how they actually will end up working as a rig element. But for now, I would just put them together and then work with the character for a while and see how they work out. And then eventually you might want to reposition things to fit better for what you wanted. Okay, so the connections were just essentially kind of going through. Let's close up the pelvis joint so you're not looking at that. So basically what we're looking at are these things here. So we have to organize these to work properly. So first off, we can see that these clusters they match these names for the controls. And so basically you're going to put your lower spine cluster in your lower spine control, and you're going to put your upper spine cluster in your upper spine control. So that one's pretty easy. So again, I'm going to middle mouse click on the lower spine cluster and just take it to the lower spine control and drop it. Again, the selections aren't really an issue. It's just that it was selected. So then I'm just going to take the upper spine cluster and put it in the upper spine control. So now those are inside. Those are parented to one another, right? So now I have a real simple way for the animator to grab the joints and move them around. And before, that was really actually pretty impossible because you'd have to get that curve, and that was so hard to grab at that point. So now we've got it set up so that even if you're shaded solid, you can grab that real easy. So that's nice. So now basically what we want to do is we want to tell the upper spine to rotate with back control when it rotates. So I actually see I forgot one thing. Let me undo. So I forgot to freeze transformations, didn't I? And like I said in class, I tend to forget that. So when I'm starting to produce or put things together, eventually I start to notice, oh my gosh, I got numbers in there. So I'm going to just select all of those new control curves I made. Freeze transformations. So again, those are all now zeros for rotates, translates. Scale's always 1 in this case. So I'll just do that one more time. So again, it doesn't matter that something's selected, it's just middle mouse drag into the proper folder. And more than likely, I actually could have frozen those without taking them out. So now I'll take my upper spine control, and the upper spine control is going to be inside of the back control. So now if I click on my back control, you can see that the upper spine is selected with it. Again, if I rotate from the back, you can see that now the whole back bends over. Works pretty well. Okay, so now we need to get all of these things inside of the pelvis control. So I'm just going to shift select both of those. So I got back control and lower spine, just middle mouse, drag those into the pelvis control. And so now when I click on the pelvis control, I get all of these curves. Again, this pelvis control really eventually will end up moving the entire character. So there's a lot more to achieve with this, but let's just kind of right now it feels kind of like singular, but it'll eventually, more things will sort of end up moving with it when it moves. So there's two more things to set this up. First off, we want to do the parent constraint to the pelvis. So right now, if we do move the pelvis control, you can see that the pelvis joint below is actually not moving with anything. It's actually just staying right there. Okay. What we want to do is we're going to actually parent the lower spine control. Actually, the pelvis is going to be parented to the lower spine control. So the pelvis is actually going to go to the look to the spine control as to what to do. So I'm going to select my lower spine control, shift select the pelvis. We're going to do a constraint. This one's actually going to be the parent constraint. I don't know why those helps keep coming up. I got to find out what's going on with that. It'd be nice to have that go away. So I just clicked on parent. You can see it worked, but let me just do that one more time. We'll go to constrain parent, and again, the window's blocking my view. So I want to go to that little box right there to open up the options. And really, default options have been to our favor already, but just always pointing out the maintain offset. And in some cases, this isn't an issue, but in terms of our class, we're always just going to, by default, maintain offset is just always checked. Just go ahead and say add. And what you'll notice is that you should see, if you click onto the pelvis joint, again, here's the pelvis joint, tells you that that's the pelvis joint, you should see blue coming on the translates and the rotates. And if I go to the upper spine again, you should see nothing went onto that, okay? The rotation should look something like this. So the bottom's actually moving along like that. This will be good because it'll lift up the hips and give you a really good hip control. And then even though it seems like we didn't connect this to the pelvis, it seems odd, like why would that move? But it does move because this is actually inside of this. So since this moves, and if that moves, right? So it's one of those deals. And again, that's kind of like, that's just rigging in general. That's how a lot of it's done. It's the things inside of things, right? So it looks pretty simple. Just if you close up your pelvis control, now you see just really you have a pretty simple looking thing. Looks good. So one of the last setups that we did was just basically taking the upper spine control and connecting it to the spine's IK handles twist. Again, it kind of seems like when you rotate this object, it really seems like it's kind of already doing this for us. And again, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think for now I'm just going to leave it out and just move to the neck. Quite honestly, let's just do this. No, actually, we did that in the class, so let's do that. So what I did is I basically took the Y value and I put it into the IK handle. We did this with the connection editor. So window, general editors, connection editor. Go away, snap 2 points. What is up with this help thing? It's annoying. That's not really not going away. So now we've got the upper spine is actually selected again with these sorts of things. If you don't have something selected, if I reload left, you basically just select what you want and just reload where you want it. So reload left. Remember that I turned off show non-keyable. So if you're seeing a bunch of stuff like that, just go to your display and turn off show non-keyable. And I did that on both of them, so both sides will show up this way. Let's look my spine IK. Reload left, or right, excuse me. And basically what we did is we took the Y rotate and we just applied it to the twist value. And so now when I rotate, I get the twist value, which again looks very similar. I'm not sure how much that's changing things, to be honest. We'll see over time. Okay, now we can do the head and the neck. So I'm basically going to copy the copy curve, or duplicate, Command D. For duplicate, I'm going to get my move tool, select the center of the tool. I'm going to just snap it up to the neck, hit F, so I'm kind of centered on that. And what I was doing in class for these was moving these out, and again, kind of encouraging people to start to think about positions and where things are. So I rotated mine and put it into kind of position similar there, like that, behind the neck. Then I duplicated the object and I took the next one and just snapped it to the head. Do a little rotation, kind of. Actually, let's just put it back straight, I think is what I did. I like having kind of a, lately this is what I've been doing, it's kind of like a stick. And then moving it kind of above the head. Maybe even snapping it to this joint at the top, the head end joint, just as a place. And then just having this stick kind of coming out of the top of the head, and that's my selector for the head. And then this is my selector for the neck in the back here, like this. It's a little bit wide. I'm going to make this just maybe match. It's not totally matching, it's close enough. So we always freeze our transformations, so modify freeze transformations. So last time I forgot that, right? So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll name them. So this was called the neck CNTL. And this one's called head CNTL. I like this method that we use to attach these two because this is kind of a more traditional method that we used to do in the class. So I am kind of wanting to leave it in here, but there are a number of ways you can manage what we're doing here. So look around and see if there's other ways that you like, but we'll just continue on. So I'm going to go to Home, which allows me to change my pivot point. And we did talk about this, that having the pivot point, actually it will work out there, but for some people it feels a bit awkward. Sometimes it feels more natural to rotate from the joint that's affecting things rather than the object itself. So that's, again, kind of a preference. But by default, we're just going to follow that same idea. So we're just going to move the pivot points of both these objects to their respective joints. So I'm just holding V and middle mouse dragging and snapping the pivot point to their respective places. So the head pivot point of the control goes to the head joint, and the pivot control for the neck is actually on the neck joint. So once I'm done, I press Home. So I'm no longer editing pivot points. Now I'm just really regular edits. And you can see that both of the objects, when I select them, their pivot points are on their respective joints that they're going to work with. Okay, everything's set up. It's all ready to roll. So all I need to do is just connect these two pieces. So this was the constraining process. So a lot of people get this backwards, or they do both on one object. So again, I'm doing selecting curve, then joint. I'm going to do an orient constraint. Then I'm going to do it again up here, curve, then joint, orient constraint, and then I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to joint, then I'm going to do curve, and I'm going to do a point constraint, and then I'm going to do the joint and the curve. I'm going to do a point constraint. So they go backwards. So I'm going to start always, I kind of start on the bottom always. So for me, that helps me being methodical that way, right? So starting with the curve, shift select the joint. So this is the neck curve. Shift select the neck joint. Then I go to constrain, and this one's the really important one, where we want to actually go to the box of this. And I'm getting super annoyed by the open render view thing. Is just really annoying me. Okay, so it's actually right here. There's a little box right here. Let me see if I click away. Does that? There it is. Okay, there's the orient box. So click on that. And this is the most important one where the maintain offset is on, and really why I keep telling everyone just to turn it on all of them is the orient constraint. And again, there's a lot of stuff we're not able to talk about with the amount of stuff we're covering, but there's a lot to do with the way all the joints are pointed and stuff like that, and how this relates and stuff. Say apply. Select the joint or the curve first, and then shift select the head joint. Okay, so again, curve first, head joint. The maintain offset is on. This is an orient constraint. I'm going to say apply. And so now if I rotate these, you can see that the neck rotates with it, and that works fine. So that's the orient constraint. But you can see that if I rotate the neck, you'll see that the head doesn't come along, it just sits there. Now the head will actually work. If I rotate the head, you can see that it actually still works. It's fine, but it's just not moving with it. So now we have to set up the movement process. So closing the orient constraint. Now we do the reverse selection. So now it's the joint. Shift select the curve or the control. This time it's constrain point, and go to the box so that you can do the maintain offset. Again, trying to understand why we're doing that is important. Just going to say apply. Now we'll do the neck joint and shift select the head curve. And just say apply. And usually do a lot of my locking afterwards, but just while I'm thinking of it, because I may not get to it again for a little bit, or maybe you're doing this for other reasons, go ahead and close this. Just when you are working with this methodology, you're adding these translates to the control curve, and normally you'd want your animator just to have a clear curve. So this curve isn't clear, it's actually getting its constraint from something else. And like I said, there's a lot of ways to manage this, but this is one way. So what we normally do is just shift select both of these curves, and I'm going to just select the words, right click and go to lock selected. And that just locks it out. So now if I set keyframes or something, it won't break the connection there, and that will make that a little easier to work with for you. Now since those have the point constraints, even though I didn't connect them necessarily to the pelvis control, as you can see they're just sort of sitting off to the side, they still move along because the joints are telling them to do so. And that completes the spine portion of the character. So I'm just going to throw a save on that. So I'm on rig 3. Again, like to have those iterations, so please keep up on those iterations. So that sets us up to do the hand. So and you'll see another way to manage this sort of scenario with the hand, which might take care of the translate issues that you have over here. But this will work fine for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and come back out here and stop the video.